All right, we're joined now by criminal law expert Ian Allis to give us a little bit more details on what an inquest is. Ian, good to have you, and thank you very much for your time. A quick Google search on what the South African law says an inquest is. An inquest shall be held by the magistrate of the district in which the death is alleged to have occurred, or in a case of any doubt or dispute as to such district, or whenever the minister or any person authorizes so. So it seems to me, I mean, based on what we know about inquest, the Ahmed Timol inquest, for example, there was, of course, it was a natural death, and there was suspicion that it's not a natural death, and now the inquest has proved that it was not a natural death. So there's somebody who's sitting somewhere saying MP Tina Joemat-Patterson did not die a natural death. Is that the case?
Good evening, Thabang. Good evening to the viewers. Basically, an inquest is sought when there is a death from unnatural causes. So whether it's suicide, suspected foul play, criminal implications, it all falls under that one umbrella where there needs to be an inquest, unless there's a direct factual lack of dispute of how the person ended up passing away. But it's whenever there are controversial circumstances or unnatural causes, that's when you actually have to have an inquest, and that's when it's ordered, and as is in the case of the death of the minister.
So you're saying if the matter, for example, is a suicide, it could also warrant for an inquest to be opened? Correct.
Suicide is often, it's to eliminate basically foul play, or that there's been any any involvement by a third party in the person's death.
Yeah. So, I mean, for others, it might look like, oh, the police are investigating an inquest. It doesn't automatically mean that there could be a third party, although it could also mean that they're suspecting that there is a third party.
No, it doesn't. It basically rules out the fact that there's any foul play. So even if it's by virtue of suicide, that's where you have an autopsy and an investigation through an inquest to make sure that there was no foul play. That's not, for example, a staged suicide or one of those supposed fake or alleged assisted suicide type of deaths. It's there to eliminate whether or not suicide is involved, and then secondly, if it's not suicide, who may or may not have been the cause, and what may have been the cause, after taking into account what the autopsy says.
Yeah. So possible outcomes could be natural causes, could be accident, could be suicide, could be unlawful killing, could be something else. And is that then what's going to inform what the next step is?
Precisely. Because if there's an inquest report and if the inquest is done and they determine that there is foul play, then there needs to be a full investigation to see who was the cause of such foul play, whether it's murder or culpable homicide or something, or whatever the circumstances are. But first, the inquest deals not only with the autopsy but the facts surrounding the death of the person, whether or not they were surrounded by family. They'll have interviews with people. They'll question various individuals. They'll question doctors as to what could have in actual fact happened, what did happen, what their findings were, what their findings were not. It's basically an inquiry into what the surrounding facts of the person's death were before they make an assessment of what they want to do next.
That's interesting, because I mean we are hearing some unconfirmed reports that the Hawks, for example, are applying for access to phone records of particular MPs who are being cited in the bribery matter. But could a situation of that nature, of an inquest, bring rise to something like that, where the phone of the deceased is combed through, and people that she has spoken to and people who would have been in her vicinity and so on and so forth could be brought in for questioning at this point?
Yes, they can. What it basically is that an inquest can be admissible in court and be utilized for evidentiary purposes as well. So even if they say, for instance, her death was natural or suicide or whatever it is, if there are other ties that might be linked, because, say for instance, and this is pure presumption, that, or pure assumption and for example purposes, that there may have been a reason if she was involved in the corruption and that may have led to a suicide, then they can go ahead and try and use that evidence almost to try and go ahead and assist in the investigation. I'm not saying that I'm not saying that as a fact. I'm saying that for hypothetical and an example and explanatory purposes. But that's why it can, in actual fact, be used, and it is a formal inquiry that has a admissibility aspect in a trial if there are certain links where the person may have been involved.
Yeah. Is it something that happens automatically, or is it something that the family would need to request? Or if there's a death, the police can make the decision themselves?
It's usually a few different factors. Not every death involving foul play necessitates an inquest, but an inquest will be introduced when there are elements of foul play and there's unknown factors and there's unknown charges and involvement. So it's utilized specifically when one is trying to investigate into the whole background of what may have taken place, if there's been foul play, or if, per se, the person committed suicide, to rule out any foul play. But it does normally take place when there are criminal proceedings or pending criminal proceedings, yes, and they need to go ahead and find out more. Especially when you've got, especially in one aspect, and that is murder, is potential murder trials or people dying from unnatural causes, as is the circumstances as it is.
Yeah.
So even if a person dies at their own hands, then they can look at the autopsy and rule it as no foul play but suicide. So it helps eliminate the prospects of unnecessary investigations and unnecessary trial processes.
All right, final one. What happens if there is insufficient evidence? I mean, they suspect maybe unlawful killing or they suspect an accident, but there is not sufficient evidence.
Well, an inquest is mainly to go ahead and determine whether or not there should be an investigation if there's foul play. So obviously, if it shows that there is foul play, if you could have in both scenarios, if it shows that it's suicide, then it ends there. If there is foul play, then it will go and proceed to charges and investigation. It's not there to necessarily uncover evidence, but it's there to be a determining factor of whether there was foul play or no foul play, or if there's in fact natural causes. So it's more of a preliminary inquiry into seeing whether those steps need to be followed and whether there needs to be investigations into whether or not the person did go ahead and die at another person's hands, or what was actually the cause of death, or if the autopsy clarifies everything up. You'll even find, for example, in poisoning, whether poison was ingested, injected, hangings where there may have been trauma to the body or something else, and it's just staged to look like a suicide. It helps eliminate what the actual surrounding circumstances, and if there is foul play involved, then it's up for the police to investigate it further, or whether the matter won't proceed any further with those criminal investigations.
Ian Allis, appreciate your time. Thanks so much for coming on tonight. That's criminal law expert there, Ian Allis, explaining, of course, the latest developments as far as the death of MP Joemat-Patterson. Police opening an inquest docket.